Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's continuing webinar series aimed at relevant topics towards publishing and media organizations. My name is Brett Kierstead. I'm Senior Vice President of Sales and Operations, and I'm your monthly host for this educational session. You can see I've been at this now 42 consecutive months because on my screen I just realized that I have February, but I assure you it is already March if you're worried about how late we are in the year. Anyway, today we're focused on how media companies are using behavioral tracking to drive revenue. A very near and dear subject to a lot of clients and a lot of companies and media companies in the industry that are trying to change the economic model, their lead gen programs, their event marketing, and how they go about communicating with their audience. And behavioral tracking is a hot topic. A lot of people are tackling it. This is a very popular registration list, so we're going to get right into covering this today. For those of you who are new to knowledge marketing or to these webinars, we have very focused technology and business services for publishers and media companies, really in 5 key areas. 1, helping them build and manage a unified audience database, which will be a lot of the foundation for the discussion today. We are full-service email platform, so the distribution of all your e-marketing as well as newsletter and content data via email. We provide traditional circulation management and fulfillment services for those of you with print magazines, like our customers, that are continuing in many ways to see them continue to be a very healthy and viable part of their business. We also help capture behavioral information and reporting, which is a good foundation for today. And we're trying to do a lot of work around media sales and marketing strategy for media companies. So we're growing fast. We provide a very good service, and you know, we appreciate a lot of these customers that you see here, and a lot of the ideas that they execute on are the ones we try to use today to share with the industry to kind of pay it all forward. So without further ado, today's subject again is around behaviors, so behavioral events that occur and how well you are or are not using behavioral tracking to make money for your organization. So we're going to start off with the infamous poll, and really here I will launch it for you. Okay, so if you take a minute to go through it, here's the way it works. You know, in relation to using behavioral data in your list targeting, lead gen, product development, event marketing, sales, all the areas that you have behavioral data out there, which of these applies to you? A, you're totally there. You are rocking it. Number 2, you're getting going. You're actively working on behavioral data that's out there, and you know there's something going, but it's still a work in progress. Or lastly, your early stages, you would put yourself behind the 8 ball, if you want to think of it that way. So I'll give you about a few more seconds to answer the questions, and then I'll share the poll results with you, and we can go from there. All right. So we'll stop it there. Almost everybody voted. Thank you. So I'll share that with you. You can see the poll results that the 13%, so a little over 10% of you are there. You're kicking butt, and hopefully you're here to kind of hear some new ideas, maybe some things you hadn't thought about. The bulk of you fall in the other 2 categories. You know, some of you are you know, 40% of you are getting going. You've made some progress, but you're looking to keep going on that, and then the rest of you are hopefully here for a little bit of education, and maybe this will jumpstart some ideas for you. So again, thanks everybody for a response, and that's a good framework for getting ourselves going. Okay, so we're going to cover this in 2 parts, and usually I go about 40 minutes, so I appreciate you hanging in there, and hopefully it'll be worth your while. For those of you who have questions, by the way, you can submit them through the question box. I do record this. A lot of people share it with different folks within their organization that might not have joined today, but the content might be relevant. So we do have a recording of this as well. Okay, we're going to cover 2 parts today. Number 1 is some of the infrastructure stuff and best practices on setting up effective behavioral tracking environment. A lot of you, again, 40-something% of you really are just getting going on this. Some of you are in the middle of it, and before you get too far, I want to give you some warning signs and some best practices on what to do. And then once we understand it conceptually, once we're clear on that, then we can talk about some sample use cases that you guys can put into play. All right, let's talk a little bit about behavior. I'm going to use an illustration from one of our clients, what I think is one of the best-run companies that I've encountered, the folks at Chief Executive and Marshall Cooper and his organization based out in the Northeast. And so I want to make you use this visual example so you get a feel for what we mean by behavioral data and the difference between behavioral data and some other things that we may have encountered. You know, as a media company, you're blessed these days with a very diverse set of content channels. You have people that engage you online, offline, newsletters with an email and a live events, webinars, websites, publications. You've got a great amount of information and sources for various different types of data. And the footprint that people leave for you is the core raw materials of what behavioral information provides. So I'm going to break this down a little bit for you so again that we'll get a good definitional look at behavioral data, okay? First of all, let's look at something that's what I would consider not behavioral data, which is demographic data. Demographics or profile data, a lot of us as media companies collect this information at a point in time. And it tells us at some point in time when we responded and to some specific information, maybe it was a subscription, maybe we were signing up for something, we provided some profile information. Now this is just profile data. It doesn't tell you much about my interests, it just shows a point in time, okay? So demographic data is a lot of what you guys have sold off of. You said, I want to rent the list of all of the vice presidents in such and such a company with at least 100 million in revenue, right? So that's traditional demographic marketing. And it's served the industry well, but it's inefficient and it's also not current with other information that you can have. So again, very valuable stuff that we possess, but again, not necessarily in the category of behavioral, okay? Behavioral, in turn, if you think about behavior and you take its literal definition, it means I behaved, I did something. So we like to think of it as activities that audience members are actually doing. So there's action around them. They subscribe, they open, they view, they register, they click, they attend. These are audience behavior items that differentiate somebody from just simply being in your database to being somebody that's active, engaged with your products. Okay, so one element of behavioral that is a lot of energy around right now is thinking about how do you use these events and these actions to create additional opportunity. Okay, but I want to add another element to it, and that is called contextual. Okay, so contextual in particular relates to how people engage with editorial content. So yes, I subscribe, yes, I open, yes, I click. Those are actions. But if you add the context part to it, you tell a story around specifically what that meant. In other words, you know, your topics, maybe links or interests or content categories, or maybe the time or the device. There's some kind of story around that content interaction. Location, where did they attend something, you know, what was the article about? So behaviors says that I clicked. Context says what I clicked about, okay? So if I'm a vice president, I clicked 2 different articles this month, and both of them were about genetic engineering, that combines my information from my demographics to my behaviors to my context, and now you have a complete workable marketing profile. Okay, so we like to use these terminologies. It's a good way to think about it because some of you might have tracking today around clickers, but you don't tie back together what that article was about. So you have some behavioral, but you may not have all the context, okay? Critical to understand this. All right, going forward, we'll use it for the basis of the rest of today. So again, not just some of those, you also might have, some of you are looking at time of day. That could be another behavioral attribute, or when do people click more frequently, day of the week, time of the day. Device preference, some people are doing analysis on saying these people typically, this person typically connects using a mobile device, or this group of people uses a web. You know, so those kinds of other contextual attributes are important, as well as additional advanced location tracking. You know, so it's not just regional or state, it can be, you know, zip codes within a particular area. I mean, these are all, you know, attributes of behavior that when you tie them together, they paint an even broader story. Okay? For those of you who are, this is just an FYI, for those of you who have looked at marketing automation, or you look at it and it makes your eyes cross, or you think it's a big investment or something, I want to just separate out the difference between marketing automation techniques and marketing automation technology. The marketing automation techniques that are out there, when people talk about that, understand that the predominance of marketing automation is based on the logic of leveraging behavioral and contextual data. When people open, do this. When they click, do this. If they purchase, do that. If they don't, do this. You guys have the ability to do all of that today. However, you may not have the technology to do it in a pure automation manner, but don't forget that you still have the ability to follow that same logic in terms of how you do segmentation, nurturing campaigns, etc., even if it's done through analysis as opposed to automation. So again, the main point of this is just to say, when you hear marketing automation out there and you wonder what it's all about, it's leveraging these different interactions to create for you a better outcome using more targeted behaviors and context. Okay? And lastly, for fun, I did throw this in there, the old reader service card, for humor and laugh for those of you who have been around. If you think about it to a degree, even in a traditional media like reader service, some of you ask questions about topics of interest and they fill in the little bubbles or they circle the things, and sometimes it's advertiser related, but sometimes it's even behavioral. You know, like I'm interested in outdoors, or I'm interested in, you know, travel. So even those represent contextual or topical behaviors of interest. So don't get hung up so much on this being so fancy and new, because some of the data that you may have collected, even from the most traditional sources, may provide you with some fuel, if you will, to get you going in this area. So for those of you who have been in publishing long enough to know what reader service is, there you go. Okay, so let's talk about setting up the environment. Here's some recommendations. First of all, you know, just tracking topics or tracking behaviors, you don't want to do it just for fun, right? There has to be a purpose, and there has to be a premise as a business. And I think one of the big premises is to say that you believe as a business that you want to get into a mannerism on everything that you do that is targeting oriented. Meaning, if your whole purpose is to be general interest and you just want the largest audience, you don't really care, you just want to send the most broadest content to the most number of people, you're not doing that sophisticated targeting, then really behavioral activity, it's fine, but it's not really going to get you any value benefit. When you look at this model and you say to yourself, I see opportunity for us to provide targeting, whether it's advertising or messaging or content or what have you, and you drill it down into a very narrow subset, that's the reason from a business perspective of why this would make sense. If you're somebody that's frustrated by demographic, you know, batch and blast, or you're an audience development, you get mad when sales sells only lead programs that has to blast the most number of people, this is a fuel for you to help come back with a more targeted and more you know, data-based strategy. So let me give you an example of what we mean by setting up the environment properly. One of the things that we encounter quite a bit is the whole idea around content structure. You guys are content machines. You produce it for the industries that you're in, and people are trying to find logic about how they tag content. They'll say, oh, we've tagged our articles, or we've tagged our content. And anytime I ask them what their strategy is, it's funny how they have a hard time explaining what the purpose of doing it was, other than to know what the articles are about. It's like, well, okay, so what? What are you going to do with it? So let me show you an example of a good thought process on this. So let's say, for example, you have an article, you have content or an event, anything you're going to create. Setting up a behavioral foundation might look something like this. Let's say an article has a primary topic to it, and then underneath that there's maybe a subtopic, you know, and so maybe you have a general topic that you have, and there's subtopics underneath it. So, for example, we might say something like, let's say you're in farming or agriculture, and your generic topic is organic farming. And so you write content, you create content around organic farming. What good behavioral targeting is getting you set up to do, however, is to think about content strategy from multiple different purposes. So instead of having a single content tagging strategy like organic farming, you might have a secondary group that says, you know, seeds, soil, packaging, retail, right? So these are components of organic farming, and the reason why you might set this up from a planning perspective is to say, look, you know, anytime we have, if we had an article about seeds, let's just say seeds that are used for organic farming, there's a couple of things that we know we could produce from that. Number one of our largest clients, let's say Pioneer, that makes seeds, would be a great advertising partner or lead gen partner. They'd love to know exactly within our database, not just who's interested in organic farming, but who does it from the perspective of seeds. Because when we look at the people and the behaviors of people that engage with that content, we know that that advertiser will have an incredible degree of interest in that level of detail. Simultaneously, we might look at the topic of seeds, the subtopic, and say, you know, that's a natural subject for a webinar where we can talk about, you know, the advancements in seed technology within the overall category of organic farming. And then we want to go out and use that behavior, you know, that contextual interest as a marketing mechanism to draw in people. So I think some people randomly put together content tagging without really thinking through the ramifications of what does it mean when it comes to behavioral marketing. Well, again, we all know if I'm an advertiser and I give you two choices, I can tell you somebody that's interested, if you're you know, packaging and you're interested in the packaging of how organic foods are packaged, and I can say I have people that are interested in organic farming, or I'm Green Giant, and I can have people that are interested in not only organic farming, but how that's appropriately packaged and distributed. I know that that's a more interesting topic. So this is a visual manifestation of when you set up your environment with the end goal in mind of providing more targeted messaging. So some recommendations that I have for you is as follows. Ask yourself this question. If you're in the process of tagging content or setting up behavioral tracking, ask yourself some of these questions around topics specifically. Number one, what type of topics would be valuable for key advertisers? So what words does somebody that you know spends a lot of money with you hang on? What are their key value propositions? Another one is, what topics do you have unique domain expertise? Again, if you are in the farming space and you guys as a publisher write content for a very specific area, you know that you'll be able to do webinars and white papers and sponsored content and events around that topic which you have unique domain expertise. So again, make sure you're thinking about that as well. Again, like I said, logically, what topics lend themselves to webinars and long-form papers that you can use that behavioral tracking to create product from. Live event sessions is another one. All of you guys are trying to make money in events. Everybody loves it. And you're trying to figure out what are a way to draw in attractive people that may have engaged you in other ways and get them to spend money to come to a live event. Well, naturally, to provide them content that's of interest to them is one way to do it. So again, ask yourself, are the topics that you're tracking lend themselves to sessions at live events? And lastly, what subjects or content would produce expensive leads? Again, there's a big difference between, you know, content related to bioengineering of some expensive research versus generic content. And again, think about your topics and say, this is the type of user or reader or contextual advertising prospect that people would pay a lot of money to have. Okay, so here's an example. This is an article. This pulled one off of, again, our friends at Chief Executive. You know, here's an article. We might look at this and say, okay, here's an article about lessons in good giving, why companies are aligning social change with the corporate mission. So we might look at this article and say, okay, corporate responsibility, social change, you know, these are kind of keywords that people might find interesting. You know, a company like Whole Foods, which is very, let's say, environmentally conscious or socially conscious, might find that those types of people would be drawn to a business that similarly has a social mission. Event sessions, if you do a live event, you might talk about corporate responsibility, you know, how businesses are using that, and you can draw in attendees and advertisers to that particular content. So again, the goal of this is planning some targeting mechanism and using your structure from a tagging and content perspective to do behavioral messaging. Okay? From a data perspective, then, behind the scenes, this is just a visual from a sample database we have. You might have topics that are common to your business, you know, things that you're familiar with, important areas, and then a mechanism to track and do segmentation. So you want to segment out people by open, by email subject, by website visits, by topics, whatever it is. You just need a framework to access that data. But once you have the nomenclature and the naming process in place, a lot of these tools that are available are a lot more effective when you have data to draw from. So a list might go something like this, you know, bridge design, construction, design engineering, clicked at least twice, visited a website. That might produce a huge list. You might look at the overlap and say, gosh, you know, out of those 100,000 people, there's 704 of them that are interested in the topics, that are actively clicking. So they've got the behavioral component, they've got the contextual component, they've got the website component. Now we've got 704 names that we really want to hone in on. So once you've got the infrastructure set up, topics, tracking, and mechanism, now we're ready to get down to business. Okay, so that's part one. Hopefully you'll take away some strategic ideas as you're thinking about the framework of setting it up. Now let's get into how to use it. So what do you do? What do you do now that you have all this information, that you have the ability to do some targeting across the things that you guys normally encounter to make money? So typically you guys make money in 6 or 7 different ways. You know, through direct marketing, so email messaging potentially, or other direct marketing strategies. You know, you use data for product development. You know, do I want a new event? Do I want a new newsletter? And how can these things help me? Again, new events that you want to do specifically around event marketing, and not necessarily new events, but maybe how do we get attendees? How do we get registrants? How do we pick the location? Leads are all popular these days. Everybody's selling lead programs, and so how can using behaviors and context help you in that area? Ad placement, you know, website ads. Everybody's trying to customize their websites with better ads that are more relevant, especially in the ad blocking days. You got to be careful with what you put there. And so how can data help you? And then lastly, a little bit about preparation for sales. So we're going to walk through a little example of each of these areas, and hopefully you guys can take away something from it. Let's talk about direct marketing. You can ask yourself whether you think, you know, you're doing a great job of emailing your list, or whether you think that you're borderline spam, or your salespeople potentially are selling too much batch and blast. That's up to you to decide how you feel about that. But surely the market is telling you, or telling us as an industry, that we can't get away with just sending anything we want to anybody. You know, the switching costs are not high as they used to be, and we're not the only game in town. There's a lot of people providing content, even within our own verticals, that if we're not careful with how we do list targeting and management, we're asking for trouble. You know, we're asking for brand erosion if we're sending the wrong stuff to the wrong people. And I think in a lot of areas we know, especially for general email, we're starting to see declining metrics, you know, on open rates, click rates, and an increase in unsubscribe. And that all comes from the fact that people are really focused on this volume-based versus targeted. Then lastly, the thing that I keep hearing popping up is this whole guaranteed lead program. So we think we're being clever now as a sales group by saying, well, instead of 50,000 CPM, we're going to guarantee you 100 leads. And what happens is that you turn around and you send 50,000 emails anyway, and you have the same effect of a detrimental wear and tear on your list, instead of using this kind of data to get at a more targeted result. So here's a perfect example. Let's say what we're, you know, this is an example of somewhat similar to a relationship story that a client told me, a little bit about the different areas. So if you just purely pick demographically, you might come up with a 50,000 list. Maybe it's all people in a magazine, or all people in a vertical, or all people with a specific title. And you know, you're going to send a lot of people. And by nature, we all know that you, especially if it's an ad or any kind of call to action, you end up with lower open rates, lower conversion rates. And yes, you can get to a high lead number, but you got to ask yourself, at what cost? All right, because if you have an unsubscribe rate, if you have people that turn you off, especially to marketing programs, the big fear that you have is they then turn off your editorial. Because if they start turning off your editorial or stop taking your event marketing, you're going to end up costing yourself significantly in the long run through degradation of your other products. A better strategy is to incorporate in some behavioral information. So now instead of just sending it to everybody, maybe we want to look at certain lead scores, certain click behavior, website attendance, maybe past history of event attendance, recency of data. I mean, there's some other attributes that may narrow that list down And as we know, the more targeted you get, you then tend to see higher conversion rates. So you might get to your 250 leads in this example by sending less to a more targeted list, but getting higher rates in the middle and still ending up with the same desired result. Lastly, what really we're trying to go for is to use all of the available tools we have, every piece of data, from interest to topics to behavior, etc., to get down to dramatic improvement in those middle ratios with lower send rate, but still targeting the desired outcome that you have from a lead program. So what I would recommend is, in anybody, if you're negotiating with a salesperson or a publisher who only wants you to send as many as possible, try and ask them if you can start from the bottom and see what that gets you. At least negotiate before you blast out 50 the right to try the bottom. Because I think, as we all know, you're going to churn lists less over time, and we're all more interested in opening content that's more applicable to us. Okay? So that's one. Use behaviors to do targeted marketing to stop list attrition and stop batch and blast. All right, number two. Let's go back to content. So products. So creating products. This example has a little bit to do with like newsletters. So, typically we've all focused on the desire around creating newsletters with as large a number of people as possible. Everybody wants to puff out their chest that they have 50,000 people on the newsletter that they send out. They don't even care that there's a crappy open rate or crappy conversion rates. They're just happy that they have a lot of names. Well, in the old way, that was really the pursuit. So using our example here, we might say, here's our organic farming newsletter, and maybe we want that to go to as many people as possible. And within the article, within the newsletter called Organic Farming, we might have seeds articles, soil articles, packaging articles, and retail, but yet I have to look through or kind of pour through all of those different articles to get to what I want. Well, instead, I think what people are trying to do is to say, look, we can create the content once and then parse it out among different lists that may have some overlap, but ultimately has a more tighter theme to the content, to the distribution, more focused channel, and so smaller distributions but more frequently. So again, visually, this is a relevant story a client told me was they broke out a newsletter that had a large distribution but lower performance rates and had a harder time from an advertising perspective. They looked at all their behavioral analysis at opens, clicks, reads, unreads, people that don't read, and they broke it down into 3 smaller newsletters that came out on a more frequent basis. So again, you don't need any more content here. Yes, you need more work because you're distributing out and there's different layouts, but usually that's not the hardest piece. The hardest piece is taking the original content and then figuring out from a list perspective how to break it down. So they get higher rates, you get higher performance, and typically you might have an advertiser that instead of buying 1, now might buy in 2 because they know it's more targeted and they can understand the list. So again, behavioral information can take big lists, big content packages, and break them down into smaller ones for more opportunity. Okay, next up is event planning. Those of you who are in the events business, here's what I always hear. Here's how they do events. Well, we got a live event coming up, and we start with last year's attendees and maybe the last 3 years. Then we go look at people that may have had a engaged to a certain product, or we look at a demographic, and then maybe we find people in the geographic area. So if it's in Austin, Texas, we're going to do a 200-mile radius of that or something broad like that. And maybe, we'll look at competitors or, or advertise, for advertising. That's kind of our list. Well, that's fine, but what's coming on now is more looking at some real detailed behavior, looking at other pieces of information that can augment that issue. So let's take a look at things like badge swipe data, right? A lot of you have events, live events, and there's badge swipes. Well, people are leaving for themselves a behavioral and contextual footprint by telling you topics of interest. You all send out that survey and you're like, did this session really good, right? And you're like, last year, Carl was a great speaker. We should go back. Well, that's great, but there's so much more technology available to collect information that is a lot more interesting than whether someone got 4.2 on a survey. So I would encourage you to look at some of that data. Next up is content from an author. A lot of times if you analyze your behavioral opens and clicks around an author, and let's say you have somebody that produces content that is very well read, well, you should go back to everybody that likes reading that author, that editor's content, and if that editor either featured there or some of the ideas at your live event, market to that segmented group saying, you know, such and such an editor will be there to discuss such and such an article, you know, whatever it might be. But that editorial tie back is very important. Advertiser interest, again, everybody who's clicked on an ad or any article anywhere within your universe that is to a specific advertiser, you would want to present that behavior to that advertiser as an opportunity for them to maybe sponsor or be engaged with that particular live event. The last one is I always kind of joke about the less than 15 minutes up the highway. You know, when you look at something geography-wise, instead of saying, oh, you know, within a 200-mile radius, you know, you can look at people on a map and you can say, you know, these people are within 15 miles of Highway 35. If you just drive up 35, you'll be there. You know, it's a much different way of looking at it than looking at specifically only traditional 200-mile radius. One of our clients described this process that he went through and some of these techniques, and his quote was, you know, there was an event that had 3 consecutive years of flat attendance that this past year he increased attendance and revenue 40%. And he spent a lot more time on the targeting piece, and the yield for it was significant. I mean, it takes more time to do targeting because you have to create multiple messages, but it's a really good way to get the results. So again, trade show swipes, you know, looking at badge data to give you a lesson of what people are interested in. Geographic segmentation, again, you might want to plot people, again, not just a 200-mile radius, but is there some way to segment within a really tight radius and then give them some language around how convenient it is to get there. You know, advertiser, you know, people that clicked on a particular advertiser we talked about, and this is our good friends at Scranton who have a lot of great content and track a lot of interesting information. Again, maybe there's authors. I don't know whether they would do this or not. It's just an example of a good way of actually taking something that you know has relevance from a contextual standpoint and using it as a marketing tool. Okay? Let's keep going because I got 10 minutes left. Let's talk about leads and data. So there's a quote that, I don't know who said this, but I can't find who said it, but I remember hearing it. It basically says this, that ubiquitous data seeks to be free and exclusive data seeks to be expensive. And if you think back in the demographic area, there's every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there is selling people's name and phone number, and email is a little bit more expensive, but behavioral information is stuff that only you know. Only you know topics of interest. Only you know articles read. Only you know events attended and swiped and sessions and webinars. Everybody knows demographic data for the most part. The stuff that you have that's of high value is stuff that's unique to you. It's exclusive to you. We like to use the analogy that the smaller the slice, the higher the price. The less amount of data, the more targeted, the more focused list, you have a right to charge a premium. That's why diamonds are more expensive than coal, I guess, because there's just, well, not these days, but anyway, the opportunity is that the less scarce that something is, you have a right to a premium. You know, so again, in this example, we might break these out as premium price data for a generic lead that has 3 components to it that will say for price A you get demographics, for price B you get behaviors, and price C you get context. You know, there's a mechanism here for doing that. A lot of the way people try to do it is to do different lead packaging, different descriptions of leads, from basic leads to qualified leads to nurtured leads to behavioral leads. These are the kinds of words that are showing up in a lot of sales proposals and a lot of marketing messaging that you guys have a way of distinguishing between different types of information. So again, a basic lead, name, title, company, email, some kind of reg question that you ask, but a behavioral lead might not only include some additional demographics, but also topics of interest, preferred medium, advertisers that they've clicked on, a specific lead score that's been calculated based on behavior. You know, an enhanced behavioral lead has so much more to it, and again, it commands a premium. The essence of behavior and context, a lot of you, another kind of sexy topic in addition to marketing automation, is lead scoring. And I can't find 2 people that can give me the same definition of lead scoring, but I will say one of the simple way to think about it is that behaviors and the more recency of those behaviors and the quality of those behaviors can contribute to a high score. So in the marketing automation world, people will say, well, we have a high lead score because they opened, clicked, downloaded, converted, did this, did that, and that creates a behavior score. Well, you guys have that today, even if you don't have marketing automation technology, because you have the ability to do and piece together across all these multiple different channels and interests a profile that can generate a score. So again, a lot of these sexy terms that are out there, these technologies, are great ways of getting you guys to buy product that really you could get to a lot of the results today just from harnessing the data that you have. Okay, so another example of a lead program like we talked about was some kind of tiered pricing on the value of a lead generated based on the amount of additional behavioral information that you collect. And again, that could be, hey, here's my behavior in relation to the most recent people behaved, or it's further the engagement, not just opens and clicks, but specific opens and clicks to a topic, or within a set of brands, or within a channel. You have so much of opportunity there when you combine lead data with it. And while our good friends at North Star are probably some of the best at this, they're very clever and very creative. Joe and the team on the sales side have really put together a different packaging and nurturing program that triggers off of behaviors and also accompanies it with data. So there's a lot of good action here. There's a lot of good thinking going on, a lot of good selling going on by focusing on this enhanced lead with a premium price coupled with, value-added services that you can provide. Okay, I want to spend 2 seconds on this one because I find this to be a fascinating subject but hard to apply. Again, I use our good friends at Scranton as an example just visually of how when people, a lot of marketing automation systems, a lot of content management systems, a lot of databases afford you the opportunity to tie ad placement to a behavior or a profile. And, when generic people show up on a website, you have functionality, the option to just play a house ad or a generic ad. But if you can identify the person either through cookie or registration process, there's some advanced work going on around trying to price out a higher premium for a relevant ad based on a behavior and a profile. So if Brett has demonstrated interest in faucets, for example, and I'm in the database, so I have that behavioral placement, when I show up through registration or through cookie, in this example, maybe Delta Faucet would pay a premium to show in front of me as opposed to a generic ad for somebody that has not previously expressed interest. So this is technically easier than it is as a business because then you have to go sell it. But understand, for a lot of you that are in the early stages, this might be an advanced use case, but you have to be thinking about these more sophisticated monetization techniques. So anyway, I don't want to get too hung up on this. I think visually you get it, but don't forget that there's automation and personalization around ads that could also be an offshoot once you understand people's topical and contextual interests. Okay, the last one I'm going to say here is something that is a bonus. It's off the wall, different, but I always make this plea, and I hope that you'll think about it. For the salespeople on the phone or publishers or those of you who interact with salespeople, again, we're on the subject of behavioral tracking. Most of you tell me that your advertisers, your prospects at your advertisers, because of the vertical nature, are also in your database as readers or subscribers, or they're on your newsletter, or they've attended events. Okay? So hear me out. Most salespeople today, they take the first step when it's time to make a sales call. They look up on LinkedIn. So they look me up on LinkedIn, and they're like, oh, here's Brett, blah, blah, blah. Here's what he does. He says this about himself. He's probably making half of it up anyway. But I'm going to use this as preparation for a sales call. Just as a reminder, one of the offshoot benefits of the fact that most of your advertisers also read your content is they're leaving trails in your database of what they really are interested in and the topics that would appeal to them, as well as things about themselves. So if I'm your destination, you're trying to make a call on me, instead of looking me up on LinkedIn, ask audience development and a database team to profile me from my behaviors within your internal database. What do I read? When do I click? What do I subscribe? when do I open? What are my topics? You shouldn't be looking on LinkedIn when you have the greatest behavioral and contextual database about me and other companies, other people within your target audience, right in your own hands. Okay, so my little bonus is use behavioral and contextual profiling to help you with sales calls for people that you're looking to target that are also readers or subscribers within your database. Okay, so here's my key points. Number one, for those of you that are new or those of you who are going, when you start setting up your behavioral tracking or your content tracking or anything you're doing, don't just let it be editorial convenience. Just because it's easy and editorial thinks about it, make sure that the business understands how do we sell it, what keywords can we sell to, what advertisers might be interested, what downstream products can we create. Setting yourself up infrastructure-wise is a mistake I see every time, not every time, but almost every time for people who just don't think about how behavioral and contextual can drive revenue. Second, once you do that, all the various different use cases we talked about, use logical and advanced behavioral tracking and targeting across all of your marketing transactions, your newsletters, your third-party lead programs, your website advertising, your event marketing, your webinar registration process, whatever it might be, just make sure you're using the most complete level of targeting possible. And then lastly, as I tried to show you in the sales example, get creative because you'll be surprised. There's a lot of interesting things that people find once you start mining into that. You find trend data, you find topical data, you find interest. There's lots of different things to see. So I encourage you, from a data discovery perspective, once you set this environment up, you'd be surprised what will come from it. So I appreciate you guys sending. Those of you who are out and about or going down to Austin for the niche events, I'll be doing a session with our friend Roberta Muller from Northstar, who's probably one of the five funniest people you'll ever meet, talking about different strategies around mining your base for fun and profit. So again, more advanced techniques from a real publisher, specifically on how they use data to provide new opportunities from both a contextual and behavioral standpoint. And for those of you who are customers on the call, which I know there's a lot of you, don't forget to register for our Camp Connect. We announced our speakers, and those of you guys who know Ryan and Eric Schoenfeld and Carl Landau, in addition to the content, there's a lot of cool things that you're going to learn on this topic and others at our customer conference coming up here in May. So again, everybody, thank you again for coming this month. It is definitely March, not February, like my first slide said. And we'll be back at it again next month. And for those of you who want to, again, get a recording of this, you can do so. Those of you who asked a lot of questions, unfortunately I ran out of time, but I promise you I will answer them on email and go from there. So again, thanks everybody. Good luck. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out and let me know. Take care.